ZBrush has several tools that we can use to create new topology based on an existing model. We have videos that talk about Z-remesher as well as remeshing using Z-sphere retopology. In this video, we're going to talk about the Topolgy Brush. Now, the Topolgy Brush allows us to draw curves on an existing Z tool to then generate new topology face by face. It's the most sort of direct manual retopology method next to Z-sphere retopology, whereas Z-remesher is an automated process that allows us to guide the algorithm using curves. Topolgy Brush allows us to directly create faces using curves. I find that it's most useful for creating costume elements and accessories on top of an existing model. In this case, we've got this orc. And what I'd like to do is create a breastplate on this model using the Topology Brush. Now, the Topology Brush requires that you only have a single subdivision level on your model. You can't have multiple subdivs. So we'll do something that we do in other videos, which is create a proxy mesh upon which to work, since the body, as you can see, has 7 subdivision levels. So I'll go to the Subtool menu, and I will duplicate this mesh. And that creates a copy of the model, and I'll just turn on solo mode so we don't see the other elements. Now, I don't need all of my subdivisions for this to work, so I'll just step down a few levels so we're not sort of dealing with so many polygons at one time. I'll delete lower and delete higher. So now I've created a mesh that has just one subdivision level. Now, to create our curve network, I'll go to B for Brush, T for Topology, and select the Topology Brush. Now, the Topology Brush is a curve-based brush. So if I have a large draw size and I start to click and drag, it creates a curve like this on the surface. X symmetry is turned on. If I turn my draw size down, you'll notice the curve that I draw is a much higher resolution. I can get finer sort of directional changes in that curve. Now, with Topology Brush, if I traverse across that curve, you'll see that it automatically creates joins. Do another one, and then you see it generates a polygon face there. If I carry on, it will keep generating polygon faces. If I were to traverse through those curves, I can split them, and we get a green circle for each vertex. If I want to delete one of these edges, hold down the Alt key and draw a new curve across it. If I want to delete all these hanging edges or these hanging curves that don't have 4 points associated with them, Alt click and drag anywhere on the model and it will delete anything that's overhanging. Now, here I've got a network of 6 faces. There's 2, 4, 6. And you see our green circles represent the vertices. If I Alt-click on the model, it will generate a topology based on those curves. Now, it's picking up the color black. So if I switch color and then Alt-click again, now it picks up the color white. And you see it's giving me a thickness for that topology. That thickness is derived from my brush size. So if I undo again and turn my brush size up and then Alt-click on the surface, I get a much thicker mesh. If I undo and turn my draw size down all the way to 1, for example, Alt-click on the mesh, now we just get a single polygon plane. We'll turn that back up again, Alt-click, and there you see we're getting thickness again. Now, if I want to delete all of my curves, I could Alt-click and drag across them like this manually, or I could go to Stroke, Curve Modifiers, or excuse me, Curve Functions, and click Delete, and that will delete all of my curves. So I want to create a cuirass, or a breastplate, on this creature as if he's got a suit of armor. So I'll turn my draw size up, turn on my X symmetry, and come to the center line here and just drag a stroke right down the center, and this will create a center line. Now be careful that you don't sort of move away from the center. We want that to be snapped right down the center line. And I'll come over here to the back, and I will do the same. So I've drawn 2 curves now, and those curves are going to snap to the underlying surface. Now, I'm also going to need a curve that goes around the arms here. So I'll just zoom in here, and I'll start drawing a curve for the armhole. And I will stop about here, zoom in, rotate around, and then if I start at the end of the curve, you'll notice that when my brush touches the curve, it becomes blue. So that allows me to carry on from that point and continue that curve. So as you see, we continue to draw, it links that curve to the previous point. So just be sort of slow and meticulous and just make sure that we connect these points clearly. You see, as I draw, it will snap to the nearest point. And that snap control is under the stroke menu. If we tear this menu off, under curve modifiers, we have curve snap distance and curve project range. So you can use these sliders to control the behavior of the curve as it snaps to other curves and to the surface underneath it. So let's do another curve around the waist here. So I'll just start from this point, drag my curve around, and I try not to go around the surface. I like to make sure that the curve ends sort of in proximity to the camera view. If I go around a surface, sometimes it can snap to a strange point, and it's just not really beneficial or easy to work with. So we just work bit by bit, working our way around, and then we will connect it to the center line here. So now I have the beginnings of my breastplate. If I grab the end point here and start to draw a new curve, we can carry this around to the back. So again, like I said, be careful not to sort of try and continue a curve projecting through the surface. I make sure that I can see that point, and then I carry it on, rotate around to the back, and then we'll carry this on to the center line here. Now you see it's trying to create a point there. It's trying to create a plane there because it interprets that as a quad, but we'll get rid of that soon enough. I'll start by creating a quad here. I'll turn my draw size down, and that's going to give me a finer resolution curve. And I'll start by creating a polygon here. I'll hold down the Alt key, and let's just get rid of these hanging edges here. It helps keep things cleaner and easier to see. We'll draw another one here. And we will draw another one here. And we'll erase these just by Alt-clicking and dragging a curve across them. Now here, this one's quite short, so I'm just going to zoom in so I make sure that I get that one. You see that unfortunately, grabs that whole section there. So I'll turn my draw size down and see if I can't delete that one like that. There we go. Now, if I go to my stroke menu and I have a curve smoothness here, I can smooth my curves like this, and then that's going to sort of smooth them on the surface and get rid of any sort of wiggles or inconsistencies in the lines, and it can help clean things up and make them a bit easier to look at. So from here, I am going to carry on a face all the way across to the center line here. Now, sometimes it's easier to get these to connect if you turn your draw size up. If I'm trying to connect one curve to another like this, that can be a bit easier. I'll bring this over here, and then let's draw a curve down here. Now you see that completes those faces. Now these aren't completing, so I'm not going to worry too much about those. I'll revisit those later if I need to. Sometimes you have to redraw a couple curves to make the faces generate. It's not a big deal. I find that if I do have a problematic face like that, I'll just carry on with the rest of my curve network and revisit it. So let's turn our draw size down again, hold down the Alt key, and I just want to get rid of that little hanging face there. So what I've done here is I've created a directional change, a star polygon here, so the faces will carry on this way and this way. So let's go ahead and draw another curve here. And my curve size was so small I didn't quite get to the center line. So I'll turn my draw size up, and I'll start from the center line and carry it over to here. Now it's not going to draw a quad there because there's an extra point there, but that's not a problem. I'm going to carry it from here to here, and I'm going to bring this one down so we get another direction change in the topology. Now, if I come back up here, grab this point, so my mouse is blue, I'm going to carry on from this point all the way down, and that's going to create that curve network for me there. Turn my draw size down, hold down the Alt key, and let's just clean up these extra edges here that are hanging. Sometimes if we zoom in, you might see that we have a little extra line right there, so I can try and get rid of that one. And I'll just clear that one off, and draw a new curve here. Turn my draw size up and draw a new curve that runs straight down all the way to the bottom here. So we're able to start getting this curve network to generate polys. We'll do another point direction change here. And there we get a nice quad, and we'll just split that. And let's get rid of those hanging edges there. I really do encourage you to clean as you go. I find that it's a lot easier for me to see what's happening and keep things clean and organized if I make a very, very basic edge flow when I'm trying to use the topology brush and keep things organized as I'm working. Otherwise, it can get a bit out of hand. So we brought that one. That appears to have snapped to the center line, so that should be good. Let's come up here, and I'm going to draw a line from here to here. Now, here you can see we have a bit of a problem. The center line has lost its point here, and it's sort of traversing over off to the side. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and delete these edges. I'm going to redraw my center line from the front. I'm going to turn off perspective, turn my draw size up, and I'm just going to bring this center line straight down again. There we go. And I want to make sure that I get a point here, so I'm going to draw a line up this way, and I'm going to bring this one across to here. And that's snapping in a strange direction, so I will undo that. And you see this one snapping over here, so let's get rid of this one just by holding down the Alt key and drawing across that. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just move off center just a little bit, make sure that my draw size is pretty big. We'll grab this point here, make sure it's lit, draw straight up like this. Then I will start my next point, not at the end point, but down here just slightly from that end point, and I'll carry this one over and make sure that it snaps to that point there. I'll grab this point. Now, sometimes it works better if you start from the center. Sometimes it works better if you start from a point that you're trying to connect. So I'll try from the center first and draw this to here. And there we go, that snaps. Draw another point from here across. And that's working pretty well. So let's go ahead and run a curve that runs straight down through here to split those faces. And here you see we've just got a little extra point there. Not a problem. I'll just get rid of that. Oops. I'll just turn my draw size down, hold down the Alt key, and just get rid of these. So now I should be able to connect from here to here, and that fills that polygon in. Now, if you have a really hard time getting a polygon to generate, sometimes ZBrush will just carry on and make them for you. It is smart enough to work that out in some cases, so always be sure to check as you go by alt-clicking on the surface and just making sure that the resulting topology is kind of what you expect it to be. Also realize this doesn't have to be the absolute perfect shape. You just want to get your topology down, and then you can generate a mesh from it, and then you use the move brush to move the points around into the position that you want them to be. So for example, if I want this aperture for the arm to be a bit tighter to the shoulder, I can always move these points once I've actually generated topology. So let's get rid of these hanging edges here. And now I want to carry a line through. So when I'm cutting across faces, this can be a little bit of a challenge. So I'll start here at the center, start drawing, and I'll probably try and end at this face here. And that's snapped pretty accurately. But you see that it now removes this face because this now has 5 points rather than 4. So I'll start from this point, carry it across to the center, and that regenerates that point. Now I'm going to start from the center and move out to these points here and see if I can't get these to generate. I'm going to carry on the edge from here just to make sure that reads as a point to ZBrush. So I'll start from here, draw to the center. I'm going to turn my draw size down a bit, start from the center, draw to here. Alt-click, just check my topology, and it's not registering that, so we just have to do a little bit of massaging in that area to make that work. So let's go ahead and draw from here to here, from here to here. and we're still not quite getting what we expect. So I'm going to clear these faces out just by alt-clicking on these curves. Make sure that we don't have any extra points along this particular curve. Let's go ahead and carry this one up a little bit. Now, it's easy to accidentally go off the center line if your draw size is too small, so I'll turn that up and carry this point up. And then I will carry this point over here, and that snaps. Carry this point over here, and that snaps. Now, if we zoom in here, you can see that hasn't quite gotten where we want it to get. So let's go ahead and turn our draw size down. Oops. Get rid of that one. Get rid of that one. And we'll redraw our center line. Let's get rid of this one as well. I am going to turn my draw size up and draw this center line starting from below where I actually need it and carrying it all the way up beyond where I need it. Now I'm going to turn off my X symmetry because sometimes if I'm running into a problem, this helps. So with my X symmetry turned off, I'll carry this point to here and this point to here. And now you see it's generating that face. So what I'll do is I'll carry this down, make these faces on this side, connecting the center to the other points. And I'm letting go just before that point. It snaps because of the snap distance. Now if I turn on my X symmetry, it will duplicate that topology across, alt-click, and now you see we actually get the topology that we expect. So be aware if you're running into an issue on the center line, you can turn your symmetry off and then it will actually regenerate symmetrically when you draw it again. So here in the front, it looks like as I was deleting edges, I might have accidentally deleted something in the back. You see, you can still select those points through the mesh. So just to correct that, see here, I've got a little line that's running through to the back. See that right there? So let's go ahead and get rid of this one. Turn my draw size down, hold down the Alt key, and let's get rid of that edge there. I'll turn my X symmetry off. There we go, we've deleted that, and that gets rid of that curve that was going all the way back to the back. I'm going to rotate off the center axis so I don't accidentally select this curve here. And let's delete this one as well. There we go. Just check the back, make sure everything's okay. Now I'll turn my X symmetry back on, turn my draw size up, and let's redraw our center line here. Bring that right down. Turn X symmetry off. And then let's reconnect these faces. We'll grab from the center line out to here. From here down to here. Now here's a situation where ZBrush is smart enough to create that quad and that quad. So you see my point is seen as being here, but it is smart enough to generate the topology. So if I alt-click and drag a line off the model, or off the topology network, it'll clear any hanging edges that are getting in the way. Turn on X symmetry. Now we're ready to generate our topology. So I can generate the topology with no thickness by turning my draw size down to 1, and then alt-clicking on the model, and that'll create a mesh with no thickness. Then we can use dynamic subdivisions thickness to generate thickness to the mesh, or we could use QMesh with ZModeler to generate thickness, or we could just manually create it by changing our draw size, alt-clicking on the mesh, and then deciding if our thickness is what we expect it to be. So I could make that a little bit thinner, so I'll undo that, and I'll use the bracket keys to turn my draw size down. So undo that, use the bracket keys on the keyboard to turn the draw size down, alt-click again. And I'm pretty happy with that thickness. So this is how you actually generate the topology. I now have my topology as part of the same subtool. I'm going to close out of the stroke menu here. go to my subtools, and you can see this is my proxy mesh, and this topology is part of that subtool. So the easiest way to separate it out is just to control click on the background to invert the masking. Under Tool, go to Visibility. Under Visibility, we have Hide Point. That hides the unmasked points. So that's an easy way to hide your proxy mesh. Then go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. And now we have the mesh itself without the proxy mesh. If I turn off Solo, you can see there's our original model there, and our subtool is now just the cuirass or the breastplate. So let's take a look at further refining this shape into something quite cool for our orc character. So I'll turn on solo mode so we're only seeing the breastplate. Go into frame mode, and you'll notice that we have polygroups already set up for the inner shell, the outer shell, and the thickness, and that can be really, really handy. You'll also see, if we zoom in, that we've got creasing on the edges there. That's the double line. So if I were to divide this, it's going to maintain those hard edges. That's just ZBrush's creasing in action. So I'll divide this up a few times and then turn solo off so we can see the underlying body. So obviously we want to take the move brush and make sure that this is lining up properly to the body underneath. So I'll just take the Alt key, hold it down while I'm using the move brush, and that will pull faces directly out. We want to scallop this section up here so there's actually flexibility in the midsection. You don't want to make that mistake where you design armor that would not actually function, that limits the mobility of the wearer to the point of being useless. So pull these out, pull these out. And I'm just working at a lower subdivision level because I'm just making big shape changes to this. Like I said while we were drawing the curve network, you don't have to worry about getting the shape exactly right in the curve network. Get the shape so you can get the topology you need, and then you can very, very easily in a matter of moments move these shapes around using the move brush. So we'll do the same thing on the back. We want to scallop this up a bit so it's not limiting movement. Bring that up, and I can step down to my lowest subdivision level to make this even easier. I'll take the Shift key, hold down the Shift key, and then turn my Z intensity down on my smooth brush so it's not so destructive. And then I can even those points out, take the move brush, and pull this back out, and pull this up. And let's go ahead and expand this out just a bit. Maybe we want to take these points and pull these out so you get sort of a kick coming off the shoulder portion, maybe feeding into a pauldron, a shoulder guard that will be added later. I'm going to step up my subdivision levels, make sure that I'm not stretching that out too much. You don't want to defeat the purpose of creating your organized topology by overextending it and stretching faces, because that will result in strange artifacts when you're sculpting on it, and it can also result in stretched UVs. So you just want to be careful of that. Step down, and I'm just going to make sure that these points follow a nice curve here. Step back up. Do a little bit of smoothing here. I can turn up my Z intensity on the smooth brush now and make that a little bit more aggressive. Take the move brush, pull these out. And there we go. Now I'd like to take this point here. I'm going to step down my subdivisions. I'd like to bring these points forward. I like the idea of having a nice sharp kind of edge right at the front of the breastplate. We'll step up our subdivision levels, and then we'll adjust the rest of the topology to help create and maintain that form. Take my move brush, pull these shapes up here. turn off frame mode, step back up our subdivisions, do a little bit of smoothing there. Now we're at our highest subdivision level. I can add another and carry on smoothing that shape. And you see, because of that creasing, I get this really nice edge here. It feels quite natural, quite good. So I'm going to go ahead and save my work. I'm just pressing the number 9 for an autosave while I'm working, but as I've said in other chapters, don't let that replace manually saving your work. Pressing the 9 hotkey will automatically save your entire ZBrush project in the Quick Save folder, in the ZBrush install folder. I will also just do a save as, because I want to make sure that you have these files available to download along with this video. So I'm going to save this as Orc Breastplate Sculpt. So now if I wanted to add a little bit of weathering or detail to this, there's a few ways that we can go about doing it. I am just going to scoot off here and make sure that it conforms to the body underneath. I don't want it to sit too far off the surface. I can step my subdivisions down to make this a little bit easier. You don't want the armor to be sort of floating above the surface if you can get away with not doing that, because it's going to make it a bit unnatural. I mean, there are areas where it is going to have some clearance away from the body, but we don't want to bulk it out so much that we lose the shape of the body underneath. There we go. So at my highest subdivision level, a few things that I like to do. I'll take the standard brush, for example, and the spray stroke, and then select an alpha, perhaps alpha 06. I like to create sort of a hammered look to the metal. So I'll turn my Z intensity down, hold down the Alt key, turn our draw size down a bit. You see, as I use this brush, I can start to create this nice sort of hammered effect, but that's a little too strong and too big. So I'll turn my draw size down a bit more and turn my Z intensity down, hold down the Alt key, and there we go. We can get this nice, almost acid etched copper, bronze, or hammered metal. If I turn my draw size up a little bit more and get a larger patterning on there, you can also use the surface noise tools under Tool, Noise, or Tools Surface Noise, to add details like this. And don't worry where it pushes into this, to the body. We can just go in with the Move brush and correct that. So just create this sort of hammered texture here. Take the Move brush. We can pull this out. And I can use the Smooth brush to correct that sharp transition there. Step down our subdivs. Spread these faces out just with Smooth. And then step back up. And then we'll just take our standard brush and add that texture on top of that. If I wanted to add some damage, I'd turn off my X symmetry, and we could take something like the damn standard brush and create a few little gashes along here, perhaps here, some scratches here. I like to hold down the Alt key when I'm using the damn standard brush, and that pinches up and creates a nice edge to your stroke. Now, I'm only at 194,000 faces right now. I could definitely put more subdivisions into this, so I'll divide again. And that's going to give us a better overall resolution. Hold down the Alt key with that brush, and we can kind of pinch up the edges of any kind of wear and tear. You could also use alphas to create this type of wear. Now, I want to create a seam that runs down the front and back, because it's very unlikely that this particular piece of armor would be slipped on like a t-shirt, for example. So what I want to do now is turn off or turn on solo mode, make sure my X symmetry is turned on, and I will turn off perspective. And using the damn standard brush, I will go to stroke, lazy mouse, make sure lazy mouse is turned on, turn on backtrack, turn on line, turn on snap to track, and turn track curvature all the way up. This will conform my stroke to a line. It'll force my stroke to stay attached to that line, and track curvature will force it to track the curvature of the mesh underneath. So if I click and drag, you see I get this line. I end it at the end of my stroke, and then I backtrack, and it will draw a straight line just like that. So I can undo that. I'll turn my draw size down quite a bit. And let's add another subdivision level. I want to get this up close to, there we are at 3 million now. So this will give us a nice sharp line. So draw my line, then I'll backtrack it a few times, and then I just repeat my stroke. I have a repeat stroke hotkey that's under stroke, modifiers, replay last. I believe the default hotkey is 1. I've set mine to Alt 1. So now you see we get this nice sort of edge here. We can take out some of that noise by smoothing that a little bit. We'll come up to the top here, and we'll add another seam here. Backtrack that. My draw size ended up being too big for that one, so I'll turn my draw size down a couple notches and then draw my line, backtrack it, and then replay stroke. And that gives us this sense of there being a divide or a dividing line or a point of attachment for these particular parts of the model. And I could detail this further using alphas, for example. If I wanted to do an alpha brush using 3D alphas, for example, if I wanted to create a bolt alpha, I could do that just by going to the Polystar. If you don't already have alphas like that available, go to B for brush, I for insert, that's insert multi-mesh. And I will go to, we'll do industrial parts and find a fastener that feels like it would work for a bit of armor. We'll go to model kit instead. We want something that's sort of like a rivet. And there we go. That's a good fastener there. So with that brush selected, that fastener selected, I'll go to geometry, modify topology, mesh from brush, and it will extract that mesh from that brush. I could divide that a couple times, just get it nice and smooth. And maybe I want to add some detailing to this, so I'll take my damn standard brush and turn off my my lazy mouse just by pressing the L key. We could put some sort of distressing on here. Divide that up again so we get a nice detail to it. There we go. And then I'll go to the standard brush, go to, we can do two ways. We can go to brush from mesh, or we can go to alpha from mesh. I'll go to brush from mesh, and that's going to create an alpha based on what I stored here. I could, and it's going to actually store it as a multi-alpha here in this brush. If I go to alpha and select from brush, from mesh, pardon me. Oops. From mesh, not to mesh. Go to alpha, from mesh, that will generate a 3D alpha, and I can change my map size. So if I wanted to increase that maybe to 1024, which might be overkill, but I like a high resolution alpha. Now I've got an alpha of that rivet. So if we come back over to our breastplate, make sure we're on the drag rectangle stroke. We'll turn our draw size down, turn our focal shift up, make sure A is turned on, so we're using alpha. And this might not be strong enough at this Z intensity because we're only at Z intensity 8, and obviously it's not. So if we bring our Z intensity up, click and drag, we can start to get something a little bit better. Let's turn that down a little bit. I'm going to turn my focal shift all the way down so we get the full effect of the alpha. There we go. So that's a little bit shallow. So I can turn this up, and I can start to create these sort of rivet fasteners. Now if I go back to, let's go back to our standard brush. Go to brush. Oops. At the bottom of the brush menu, I'm going to reset current brush, and that resets that standard brush. If I go to B for brush, C for chisel, I have the chisel brushes here. And you see if there's chisel 3D. If I select that, there's a variety of chisel brushes that are available. These are all vector displacement brushes. These we talk about in a separate video. If we go to B for brush, C for chisel, there's chisel creature, which obviously would be creature parts, and then just the chisel brush itself. And the chisel brush I have set to this particular alpha. I'll set it to drag rectangle. And this will give us a really sharp effect. We might turn down the Z intensity just a bit on that so it's not such a dome. And there you see we get a nice crispy sort of rivet alpha shape. So this is just good to give you an idea of what you can accomplish using things like the chisel brush in conjunction with 3D alphas. And of course, we have an entire chapter that's devoted to alphas and ZBrush, generating alphas from geometry, as well as using vector displacement map brushes. So we talk about all this in more depth elsewhere if you have not watched those videos just yet. Don't fear, we talk about it and tell you how to make your own alphas and brushes. So just looking for more areas to detail. Now, another thing that I like to do when I was sculpting the armor for Ares on Wonder Woman, I used this exact same technique of sort of building things up from a base mesh and detailing them like this. If we go to geometry, go to clay polish, we can use clay polish with sharp turned on. So if I turn sharp up, R sharp repeats the sharp process. So this just repeats the sharpening. If I press clay polish, it will polish the surface, and it sort of adds, if we undo that and do it again, you'll see what it does. Watch the surface quite closely. It sort of adds this sort of angular faceting to it and sharpens up any sharp edges. It'll also mask it. So if I clear the mask, I can run it again. Like so. Now, if I've got a large dent in something, maybe I've stepped down my subdivision levels and we've got like a large sort of dent here, for example. And I don't want those dents to be perfectly symmetrical. That's a bit awkward. So let's turn off X symmetry. Let's say we've got a big dent here, clay polish, and it will sharpen those up. As you see, then we step back up and we capture all the rest of our detail. And we get that nice sort of distressed denting there that's got some nice sharp edges to it. So turn off solo mode. And I can make any further changes that I want to make just by turning on transparency, and then I can rotate around the figure and just make sure that everything's lined up nicely. I'll step down my subdivisions for this, use the move brush, and just scooch these things around. So let's move this in, move this in, move this up, pull this out, step up a couple subdivision levels, and just make sure everything works nicely. Now, I don't have to draw just on the center line. I can make a pauldron on the shoulder here. I could go back to my subtools, select the body, and we'll once again duplicate it to create a proxy mesh upon which we'll draw that topology. So we have our proxy mesh once again. I will make sure X symmetry is turned on. We'll just step down a couple subdivision levels, go to geometry, delete lower, delete higher, just because we don't need to carry around a whole bunch of geometry in our proxy mesh. We just need the area we're going to work on. And I'm actually going to hide the lower body because I'm only going to be working on the shoulder and an arm area. We'll leave the head so we can get an idea of how everything relates to one another. Go to Modify Topology under Geometry and click Delete Hidden. Now I'll go to B for Brush, T for Topology, and return to the Topology brush. We have our X symmetry turned on. This time we're not going to work from a center line. This time we're just going to work right here and make a pauldron. If I turn off solo, I can make sure that the topology that I draw sort of relates to the shape that I'm retopologizing. But also, notice my curves do snap to any other subtool. So that's something to be aware of. You could either be careful of that or utilize that as you're retopologizing. If you want to retopologize two objects into a single object, perhaps you're going to use normal mapping to create the illusion of this breastplate on a body. There's various reasons why you would want to retopologize something using two underlying meshes as a guide. But we're not going to do that here. We're just going to create a pauldron. So I will just start by creating a circle here. And we'll do it much the same way we did before. And I can overdraw the shape that I intend to use. Remember, it's not necessary to get the shape exactly right. We just want the topology to be right. So if I alt-click on this, we get nothing. So let's go ahead and undo that. And then I will click and drag from here. Oops. Let's turn our draw size down so we can see this better. And I will turn on solo because the breastplate is now actually getting in the way. Draw a line from here. We'll draw a line from here. Draw a line from here. Draw a line from here. I've now created 4 points. So if I alt-click, I should be getting an actual quad there, but I am not. So let's clear this one and make sure that we traverse maybe across that one. Alt-click. Not quite yet, so I think it's going to require that I make another set of quads through here. So I'm going to bring these edges in, and I will just connect these points. There's one. There we go. Now you see it's automatically starting to make those faces for us. It's quite a nice feeling when you see those faces come into being. This one's not drawing because it's got a little extra point there. That's not a problem. If I start from here and come down here, it's going to automatically put a point there for me. And there we go. We've got 3 faces. I hold down the Alt key, delete this, and then just carry this right across to that other point. And boom, there we go. We get our faces. So let's go ahead and draw a new curve that runs right through here. Just traverse right across those. And now I'm getting what I expect. Now, I could be, really particular and go ahead and keep carrying through here and make sure that I get all the edges that I want. And you'll notice that it's automatically snapping that new topology to the surface. So the more high resolution I make it, the better it's going to ultimately represent the underlying surface. So if I do an edge through here, we should get a new edge cut through this area. We'll just make sure that it snaps there, and there we go. Now I want to get rid of my hanging edges. Alt, click and drag a new curve, and any edge that's not connected to a network and creating a face will go away. Alt click, and we have our pauldron. So I'm happy with that. Invert the mask, go to visibility, hide point, go to geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Turn off solo, and now we have our pauldrons. And remember that we automatically have creasing on these, so if I divide them, those sharp edges will stay sharp. So I can take my move brush now, and we can just adjust these so they sit nicely on the model. So depending on what you feel comfortable with, you might elect to use Topolgy Brush to block out a variety of costume elements and then sculpt on them pretty heavily and then retopologize them again using the Topolgy Brush or using edge extrusion with ZModeler, which is also another method now of generating topology inside of ZBrush. Or you might just automatically retopologize them using ZRemesher. For things like costume elements, I find ZRemesher to be really, really effective for creating quite a usable topology. So there we go. And I want this to actually come out above the cuirass. Pauldrons don't tend to sit under there. They need to be above it, so you've got mobility. Let's bring that up. And I'll solo that. I'll go to my transpose gizmo, go to the unmasked mesh center. And if I hold the control key down, I can sort of squash and stretch these out while I'm using the center scale. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on the outer face, and I am going to mask that. I'm going to reveal all, go back into draw mode, and then I will just hold down the Shift key, and I can smooth these areas, sort of soften the underside of that, but keep that nice hard edge there. You could also go to Deformation, and there's Polish by Features. Now, if I turn on this button for Polish by Features, it gives me a much more pronounced effect. As you can see, it's retaining the creasing. It's reintroducing that creasing. I could polish like this, So these sliders, don't neglect these sliders. They can be really quite handy. Polish crisp edges will take care of any sort of artifacting along the edge there. I'll clear that mask and watch what happens if I polish crisp edges. Turn my radial button on, and then it's even more pronounced. So these global deformation sliders are really, really useful, especially in hard surface, which we'll talk about this more when we're doing group loops and making our sci-fi helmet. So there we go. And I'll take my move brush, bring this up, And let's say I want to create sort of a strap. Maybe I want a strap that wraps around the arm here to sort of give the impression that this has a point of attachment, or I want to strap up here. Well, to do that, I will simply create another proxy mesh. Now you should be kind of old hat at making proxy meshes. We'll duplicate this, solo it, step down our subdivision levels. We want a little bit more resolution on this one because we're going to be creating a strap that we want to hug the body. Now, I have polygroups here, but I actually need a little bit more of the mesh than what my polygroups are going to give me. So I'm just going to manually show and hide like I did before. So we'll create a visibility marquee here. Geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Now, if I want to create a strap that runs around the body or that runs along the surface, there's actually insert mesh brushes that will do that for us. If I go to B for brush, I for insert, I have the IMM curve brushes, and these will actually create straps. There's a strap in here amongst these meshes. If we scroll over this way, we should see, where are you? We've got scales, stitches, planks. There we go, wide strap. So if I turn my draw size up, click and drag, I can get a strap like this. Turn my draw size down, click and drag, the strap becomes smaller. So we could do something like this. If we wanted a strap to wrap around our surface, we'd start drawing the curve, get a few points down, then press and hold shift, and it will snap this into a circle around the surface that I'm trying to get. So let me turn my draw size down so we get a really fine curve. Hold the shift key, and there you go. You see we get a strap that wraps right around the surface. Turn our draw size up now and touch the curve again, and we can increase the size of it now. Just like that. But let's say I want to create a strap using Topolgy Brush. I'll do B for brush, T for topology, grab my Topology Brush, and then I will just start drawing the curve just like before. Press the shift key. That'll snap it into a circle. We'll draw another one. Press the shift key. That snaps that into a circle. And then I will just carry on drawing my quads. So we will start from this point, snap to that one. And then as I draw quads, it will build my faces around. Let me turn my draw size down so it snaps to the surface a little bit cleaner. It will draw these quads going in a circle around the arm. And as I continue to refine it, be careful right there, I accidentally snapped to another curve on the other side. So that's one little nuance of the tool to be aware of. If you get excited and go too fast, you can kind of mess things up for yourself. There we go. So I'm happy with that. Alt click drag to get rid of any sort of hanging edges. Ooh, that looks like there's a little problem there. Funny thing is, if I alt click and generate topology, I bet that actually ZBrush is smart enough not to factor that in. But if I'm concerned about it, alt click and drag across that edge to delete it, and that should be fine. There we go. So this time, I'm going to turn my draw size down to 1. I'm going to alt-click on the background to generate my topology. Control-click on the background to invert my masking. Once again, go to Visibility, Hide Point, Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. Now turn off Solo. And we're not going to see that because it's just a single group of polygons right there sitting basically under the high-resolution model. I could hold down the Control key and click and drag when I do my scaling. So let me undo that. So Control, click, drag on the scaling, and I could scale them out like this, and that could make that easier to see. So let's do this again. Draw that out like that. And if I wanted to continue working on this with the edges, I could go to B for brush, Z for Z modeler. And we talk about Z modeler in much more depth in the Z modeler chapter, but I just want to illustrate that if I want to sort of continue working on this, if I hold my mouse over an edge here, press the space bar, this is contextual menu, it gives me edge options. So if I go to extrude, I could extrude edge, edge loop, I could extrude polyloop, the mesh border, and we have the option to have force it to be symmetrical. We have the option to have multiple rows as we're extruding. So basically, if I grab this and drag, I'm extruding an edge. If I go to edge loop, click and drag, that gives me the entire edge loop. And you see that it's snapping to the surface underneath it. So I can carry on like this. Solo that, and you see that we're able to very quickly generate what could potentially be like a set of banding. All right, so let's add some thickness to this. We don't have thickness to it. I'll mouse over the face here, press the space bar, and I will select Q mesh. I'll Q mesh all polygons, and this is just a quick mesh sort of extrusion modeling tool that's got a few more bells and whistles in it. But if I just click and drag, I can add thickness. Now, when you do that, be very careful that under Tool, Display Properties, double-sided is not turned on, because look, I have now inverted my normals. So I need to flip them to make sure that I haven't created something with flipped normals, which will give you problems later on down the line. You want to just be aware that that is a bit of a gotcha there. So now I could take my move brush and I could continue moving these faces. If I wanted to turn this into maybe, you know, some leather wrapping, I could divide this a few times. I'm going to undo, back down. You see we've got some creasing here. So I'm going to undo back to before my divisions, go into frame mode. You see we have creasing on these edges. If I don't want that creasing, I can go to Geometry, Crease, and click Uncrease All. Now, if I do want creasing on the edges where it changes direction, where there's thickness, there's a polygroup there. So if I click Crease PG, that will crease polygroups. So only the polygrouped edges get creased, much like we had with the cuirass. So if I now divide, I get a sharp edge there. So I could solo this, and I would just make sure that my X symmetry is turned on. Zoom out, there we go. Now, this is not necessarily the type of shape that you would want to make perfectly symmetrical, but I would take my damn standard brush. Remember that we turned on the backtrack on the lazy mouse, so we'll turn that off, and then we can just start creating some strokes along here. Now, when I'm doing really quick strokes like this, I like to turn on lock for my camera. The reason for that is, if you watch, we'll turn off frame mode, I can now make these very quick gestural strokes along the surface. If I had lock turned off, I could do these strokes, but it'd be very likely I would miss the model and then spin it. So locking the camera while I'm doing strokes like this, I find really handy. I'll just orient it kind of at the angle of my arm on my tablet, and then just start drawing these strokes. So we can create sort of a wrapping band of fabric or something, or some bunching up fabric here. Let's change our direction, carry these across. Don't forget, you can hold down the Alt key and get some nice pinched edges, which I think works really nicely when you're doing drapery. I always like to make sure that drapery and fabric has planes in it, because it does have planes. If you look at the classic illustration manuals by people like from the famous artist school out of, I believe it was New York, or Andrew Loomis, he's quite famous, or even Bern Hogarth, when they're talking about drawing drapery. And Lanterry, Edward Lanterry, when he talks about sculpting drapery, they talk about the planes. So you don't want to forget that there are planar aspects to organic forms. Now, I'll unlock my camera again. And if I wanted to sort of sharpen some of these bits, remember we could go into our creasing, or not creasing, pardon me. We could go into our clay polish, and we could do our clay polish again. So we'll see how that works. Ooh, I kind of like the look of that. Clear that out. Focus. And focus again. Now, of course, those are totally symmetrical, so I would turn my X symmetry off at this point and go in here and make some further changes to this using the move brush, just changing one side at a time. So maybe we want to bring that up a little bit, pull this out so it's not sitting inside the skin. Bring that up and come over here and make further changes to this. I always say, because my background was traditional sculpting and painting, I started out in makeup effects. So I was painting prosthetics and props and things like that, using an airbrush and sculpting in clay. And it was always a challenge for things to be symmetrical. You would have to work to make sure that you had sort of a structural symmetry in your work. And then once I moved to ZBrush, I realized that I had to make sure that I introduced asymmetry, because symmetry just came naturally to the computer. But asymmetry was something that you had to make sure that you didn't get lazy and forget to introduce. Not necessarily lazy, maybe just distracted, but it's very easy to miss out on that. And you'd be shocked once you start sort of consciously introducing symmetry into your work, that the improvement that you get. I introduce symmetry quite early, but I don't do that in my demonstrations because it will sort of complicate things for people when they're first learning ZBrush. If they start making things asymmetrical, it's really nice to have that symmetry available to you. But as you progress, or if you're already quite progressed and you're watching this as an intermediate or advanced user, you can attest to the fact that symmetry just brings so much life and variability and interest to a form. So there we go. So that is the Topolgy Brush, with some segues into a few other bits and bobs like ZModeler and using mesh, or using the clay polish tools to distress a mesh. I hope you found this useful and you can see how you can use this in your own workflow. Again, personally, I find the Topolgy Brush to be really good for creating costume elements. It's not something that I would generally use to retopologize a model from scratch. In ZBrush 2021, I would use edge extrusion for something like that. I might use it to block in a basic topology, or I would use Z-Remesher, and if Z-Remesher wasn't perfect, I might clean it up using Quad Draw in Maya. I use a variety of tools for that sort of thing, as most people do. So in my personal experience, Topolgy Brush is great for building accessories and building costume elements, but I encourage you to give it a try. I've saved out the files that I've used in this video, including the org with just the curve network, so you can experiment with generating your topology from the curves that I drew, as well as the org with the final breastplate topology. So that concludes this look at Topolgy Brush. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.